Welcome back this morning. It's still the Arise. It's still the morning show on Arise News, and I'm Biola Labi.
And I'm Victoria Pepple. Now, Paul Onwuanibe is an African business magnate best known as the MD CEO of Landmark Group, an African-focused real estate and service office company having over 500 companies as clients with offices on 5 continents. He was among the private sector delegates that attended the just concluded forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit and is here to share with us his takeaway from the summit. What Nigerian businesses must do to tap into the opportunities presented by collaborating with their Chinese counterparts and how they can remain competitive. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So there's been a lot, I'm going to jump in because there's been a lot of chatter on Twitter about the China-Africa Cooperation trip. There were some of it started with people seeing President Buhari coming off the plane and he was being welcomed by a Nigerian delegate. So there were some memes on Twitter about that, like why are the same people that traveled with him welcoming him? So that's, but that's just tongue in cheek. But I think one of the biggest debates that people have been having on Twitter, the going back and forth, is the role of China, the increasing role of China in Africa, but also the increasing role of China in the world. And there's nothing that shows China's might than this big, in Africa, than this big China-Africa Cooperation Conference. This isn't your first time there.
No, it's
what
not.
What was your experience, and what did you take away?
Well, it was very different. I've been to China quite a few times, and I suppose this is only the second time in Beijing, though. But it was obvious that Beijing was set up for Africa on this trip. So one of the things I noticed was it was actually a pleasure to be black in Beijing that week, because the city was brought to a standstill. They literally stopped the Chinese from moving around. They closed the offices, and it was really set up for Africa. All the hotels were full. All the African delegates, I think there were 52 African presidents there. And yes, it was exciting. At one end of the spectrum, people say there's a potential that Africa is selling out. At the other end of the spectrum, the more positive end is that we finally have a chance to align with a nation that's fast growing and that's where we want to be. Yeah.
And as someone that was there, how did you feel? Did you feel like you were going to be walking away with some new partnerships and new deals, and you felt like the 52 African leaders were walking away with new deals? Or did you get a sense that there's something left somewhere in the middle?
Well, always in the middle with some of the businessmen. So I have my own views about how a country should set itself up and how a country should trade and how you can create sort of commercial activity. And they're not always consistent with the views of many governments. So I sort of come more or less from the West, where I say governments should step aside, let the private sector do the work. Obviously, this is not about the government stepping aside. This is about the government knee-deep and working with the private sector from a top-down perspective to try to make the economy grow.
How many private sector delegates were on this trip from Nigeria?
Gosh, I couldn't tell you that because they're all over the place. But I would say officially maybe 10 to 15 companies. Unofficially, there were thousands of people.
Did you feel that there was a coordinated agenda and strategy going into China? Leading up to this?
Well, I think that's a question for a government official. But from a private perspective, it wasn't as coordinated as I would have liked, but then again, maybe that's my fault. Maybe I didn't prepare well enough before going.
All right, so what was the trade balance or the trade between Africa and Nigeria and China last year stood at 17 billion or $14 billion. And now this year, China is offering 60 billion to Africa. Now, a lot of people are very skeptical about this. They've said things like, nobody can be so generous. And then there are stories they're making the news about the fact that when these deals are too good, if they're not used properly, the utilizing countries cannot benefit, and then they begin to owe China a lot more than money. From the interactions you had and from the offers that were made, from the deals that were signed, these are low interest rates, lower than what the other developed countries have been giving Africa over time, and what all the financial institutions also give Nigeria. So it seems like it's too good to be true. Are you on that path as well?
No, I do say all the time that all that glitters is not gold. But at the same time, some things that do glitter are gold. So you've got to be able to separate them. So I have my concerns, like everybody else, but I also have
What are those
my
concerns?
positivities.
What are those concerns?
So I'll start from the positive
Okay.
and then delve into the concerns. And the big positive is, for those who have been to China, can understand how a country can be built. And if you've been to China or any of the other sort of emerging Southeast Asian countries, that where government actually controls a lot of things and develops. I mean, Beijing is immaculate. It's probably one of the cleanest cities I've been to, probably one of the most developed cities I've been to, and probably one of the most hospitable cities I've been to. So those three things say a lot. And if they can do it for themselves, then maybe there is a chance that if we worked with them, we can do the same things in Africa, and specifically in Nigeria.
What do you think they want back in return?
Well, I'm sure you've read and you've watched the news about sort of the what's it called, the Belt and the Road,
Yes,
or something
yes,
like that.
yes, yes.
And there's a lot of skepticism as whether they want some political
Yes.
control or. I'm not sure. I don't think the Chinese are like that. I think the Chinese want to expand their business. I think they're after the commodities.
So
Yes.
you think it's okay? But they're after commodities.
Yes,
so
it's a
you-
commodity grab. Yeah.
You haven't said your concerns.
So
don't want us to
my
do that.
concerns are. So Africa's future rests, the big risks for Africa rests on a few things, yes? One is political stability across the region and individually in some of the key countries. Two is fiscal slippage, to ensure that, fiscal policy doesn't slip too much. Three is commodity collapse. If commodities actually do collapse, you've got to ask whether China will still be interested in being in here. Four is the continuation of the reform agenda. I think everybody would agree that Africa today is not Africa 20 years ago. I think leadership is better. It may not be what we all want, but it's better than it was. It's cleaner, it's more transparent, it's more active, and it looks at the people a little bit more than just the government. So what are my real concerns? My concerns are, how do we stay on course, make sure that investor sentiment doesn't sort of erode? How do we make sure that politically politicians or leaders are not too strong, and a lot of that responsibility is devolved to the private sector? So I do believe that, if you devolve more responsibility, my fix for Africa is devolve more responsibility to the private sector. The government should provide more of an enabling atmosphere. Bilateral deals like this signed with China should involve the private sector a lot more. The biggest concern is that if you borrow $60 billion, or whatever individual countries are going to borrow, and you plow it into non-performing, non-income generating assets, then at some point, our great-grandchildren are going to have to pay this back.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest challenge also is there's a lot, with other loans, there's also oversight and much more transparency required, but with China loans, the government is at its own will to do what it wants.
True, but I don't think this is money. This is actually not money. It's not real cash. The Chinese government are not
Of course,
writing
it's,
bank
yeah,
checks.
they're not.
Yes.
But one of the things that's been happening, also once again is Zambia. Zambia has been a case now of, say, look at Chinese engagement in Zambia. I've been to China, I've also been to Zambia, and when I was in Zambia, literally people were pointing to me, the Chinese built this building, Chinese built this road, Chinese built this building. Now they're saying that some of the loans that Zambia has have not been paid back, and the Chinese are actually looking at taking over some of those assets. So there is a lot of mismatch. There's a huge risk there with some of these loans and some of these engagements that China will engage much more in Africa. While you were there, did you feel that the Chinese really want to sort of have that much presence in Africa, like own assets and sort of?
Well, if you know the Chinese, they don't mind living anywhere. And the issue here, really, and this is probably my second biggest concern. On the positive, the Chinese, when they get into a country, they actually get in knee deep. They don't sort of skim around the edges like many of the Western countries. But the biggest concern is you've got to ask yourself how much in the value chain do they actually add? How much do they leave behind when they're leaving? Yes. Because are they developing, or are they working with countries to stay in that country and grow in that country? Are they working with countries to take it sort of back to China? Now, traditionally, and we work with the Chinese, and when I say we as a company, Landmark, but traditionally the Chinese bring in everything that they use. They even bring in their labor, and they move them around, and they work hard. So how much will we get the skills transfer? Will we create employment? Will we produce technology that's appropriate for our part of the world?
Weren't these things looked into in the deals that were signed? They could bring in their people for a period of time, transfer the knowledge, and then move back. Weren't these issues that were looked at when these deals were signed?
I would hope so. I was not privy to...
No, I mean, I think this has actually been a big complaint about China around the world. And actually, one of the Zambians were always up in arms about the fact that a lot of the Chinese infrastructure built in Zambia wasn't creating jobs. Wasn't actually creating jobs at all. So that's a big problem.
Yes, no, the value chain is a huge problem. The other thing that's a problem is the quality of what the Chinese do. So in some instances, and I'm not one of those that knock the Chinese because we work with them, and I've seen the quality of what they've done in the West, and I've seen some of the quality they've done in some parts of Africa. But if you go to China, it's a real testament to what they can actually do. But traditionally, there's been that thought that when they come to Africa, they don't give us the same level of quality. They give us an African quality.
You've worked with them, is that true?
It is true if you don't demand it. So you do have, and you've alluded to that, you do have to sit down, get through your contract negotiations, ensure that what you are getting is what you want and not necessarily what they think you want. So that's very important. So when you are negotiating these deals, you do have to pay attention to the skills transfer, the things that they're bringing in, the longevity of that. There must be a lot of transparency and authenticity. And I think those two words are words that, you know, if I were advising the government, I would say transparency, authenticity are the two things you need to watch out for. Make sure whatever you're getting is authentic, make sure it's transparent, and make sure that there's a real value add and there's a leave behind.
If you assess a relationship with the Chinese government and the deals we've struck in the past 3 years, with President Muhammadu Buhari being the president of Nigeria, would you say we've gotten a fair deal? Would you say the relationship has blossomed, and can we take it several steps further?
I couldn't speak to the intricacies of any deal that's been signed directly between the government and China, but what I can do is give you my perceptions. And from a perception point of view, I think the Chinese have made some have added some value to some extent. So some of the infrastructure they have built, they can build very fast, yes, so they can produce fast. So whether it's the railways and whether it's the airport or a few roads. And the issue now is how long do these things last? And we haven't gotten there yet.
Sure.
And how much of the skills transfer has taken place? I'm concerned. So I will say I'm not sure that there are many Nigerians that have ordinary Nigerians that have benefited from that skills transfer.
Direct benefits.
Direct benefits. So it hasn't increased employment. It hasn't made a lot of people sort of more technical able to do this. If they build the airport, are we going to will they be maintaining the airport, or will there be a set of Nigerians that will be employed to maintain the airport?
You said something here, which is sort of the authenticity and actually transparency, which is also a rigor that has to go into these negotiations.
Yes.
I mean, you were there, you saw leaders from 52 countries. Did you get the sense that we are applying, or we're ready to apply, even let's say in the past maybe we haven't applied the same rigor, with the knowledge we have now, with the experience we've had now, we've learned from some of the things that have happened in Zambia. Do we think that African leadership and African citizens are ready to put in that type of rigor that needs to be put in when negotiating with China?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Okay.
So
Why
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
Well, I said this on the show once. I'm pessimistically optimistic. So yes, in that African leadership is definitely better than it was before. Yes, and there's some very smart people in government. Just walking around the corridors in Beijing, there's some extremely smart people that have some great ideas and are skeptical. And skepticism is important when you're negotiating. You can't just believe everything you see, right? So those people exist. But there's another layer. So it's not literally just the people. There's just a layer of the government itself and what the government actually wants from this and how they transfer that into the nation, which is why I said at the top of the show that it's very important to devolve a lot of responsibility for development to the private sector, because the private sector are only there to make money. They're not there for flags in the ground. So it's very important that, so they put that rigor in and look to see whether whatever deals are signed come down literally to the Naira and Kobo and benefit their own community. I think we'll get there. I think, we've got to see how these MOUs evolve. I've always said signing something and executing something are two different things.
And then also drawing down on the loan is also a whole nother thing.
It's a whole new ball game. Yes, ideas without execution are hallucinations. Yes.
I want to shift a little bit from China. Let's shift him from China and let him talk a little bit about Landmark and the Landmark real estate investments you've been doing and some of the work you've been doing, especially along the Lagos Atlantic coast.
Okay. So Landmark is a company, so we look at ourselves as a destination institutional developer. And what I mean by that is what we set out to do from day one was to create a platform where the commercial, the leisure, the entertainment, and the residential communities can sort of meet, interact, live, work, and play. So that's sort of one-stop shop setup. And the reasoning for that is obvious, is that in a nation like ours and in cities like ours that are fast-growing, there are many issues: traffic, crime, convenience. So we thought if you create a destination platform, then you combine that convenience, you shield people from sort of the crime, and you shield people from the traffic, and they're not that exposed, and you can be more efficient with your time, and you can get a better quality of sort of existence, if you like. So that business, leisure, lifestyle meeting is what basically Landmark is all about.
How accepting have Nigerians been to this?
It's a slow burn. It's a slow burn, but I'm happy to say that we get 60,000 people a week that come to sort of our landmark destination. Last year,
and which one is that? Which one?
The one on the one
yeah,
you
the
just spoke
landmark.
about.
But that's the main hall. So that's which one of them gets 60,000? Or the whole estate?
The complex,
okay,
yes, the complex, and it's still in development. We're
Okay.
probably 20% through with this, so there's still another 80% to do. So right now there's some entertainment, there's some there's offices, and there's a conference center, and we've got a few sporting facilities there. So there's 6,000 people a week. Last year there were 3 million visitors. Euromoney gave us an award for the most visited destination in Lagos as well. But it's work. It's work in progress. We still have to create our hotel offering. I mean, we have a boutique hotel, but we signed a deal with the Marriott Group to do a 250-bed hotel.
Oh.
We still have to create our residential offering. So we're in the throes of developing our Waterview apartment block, and there's another office block coming up, and there's a retail boulevard coming, so you can live, work, play, and shop.
In the recent numbers released by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, one of the areas that we actually saw grow was entertainment. There was actually growth in entertainment, but it was recreation and entertainment. Yes. There was some growth there. Yes. With the economy, and actually with everyone sort of saying they're poorer than they were before, were you guys a little surprised to see that, or are you surprised to actually see conversions on ground?
Well, no, I wasn't surprised, and I've always said this is one of the issues because of the lack of a sort of mortgage system. So people don't really have long-term money in the country, and the financial institutions don't give long-term money. So as a result, people don't have properties that they own that they can leverage on and buy expensive things. So a lot of money is spent on the things that are cheap, and entertainment in this country is fairly cheap. So if you have nothing to do, then you entertain yourself, and there are different ways of entertaining yourself. So a lot of our disposable income here is spent on entertainment, simply because you couldn't just go out and buy an apartment or buy a car or invest in a business because you don't have that financial support to do that.
There was a massive downturn in the economy that must have affected business, but now things are getting better. I'm sure.
I know.
Every recession has the numbers have dropped for inflation, so things are getting better. So the question now is, of course, plans have to be rearranged, things have to be done differently. What are the changes you're making to keep up with the economic change?
Well, responsibility, financial responsibility, I think is important. Debt is a real killer in this country because it's expensive. So one of the things that any organization, any person should do is just be responsible with how much debt you take on. And I think there's an old saying my mom used to say, cut your coat according to yourself.
Yeah, so, I think everyone's mom says that.
Yes. So that's one. The second is, something that is coming into Africa or into Nigeria more recently, which is just that whole Olympic mindset, that whole pursuit for excellence, the pursuit for integrity, the pursuit for hard work. So if you can combine those three things, excellence, integrity, hard work, in everything you do and all the people that work with you, then you begin to get somewhere in terms of providing a service that many people want. One of the problems we've had in the past is we try to get away with what we can. So we don't have quality and excellence as a benchmark in the things we do. And I think the more we do that, the more successful we will be. So it's work in progress. We're not there yet.
You said you said something about debt just now, about debt being expensive, but you also said you had Chinese partners.
Yes.
Are they investors? Have you worked? I mean, what has you been
No, they're
your
not investors.
what have been your outlook on foreign investors? Have you guys had a lot of foreign investors engaging with you?
So
Or has it all been local money?
No, it's a lot of it's foreign money. Most of it's foreign money actually, but there is a lot of local money, and we have had local banks. So we're supported by 2 local banks quite significantly. We've tried to take it on a short-term basis and use the foreign banks to deal with the long-term. Obviously, we had a few major issues when the currency devalued because we had huge dollar exposures with with legislation that was introduced to stop
Repayments, yeah.
Yes, to stop foreign receipts.
Yes.
So we
that affected you as well.
big time. We were stopped from charging our tenants in US dollars. Meanwhile, we had US dollar exposures, and the central bank were not kind enough to allow us
Give
to
you a waiver. No waivers for you.
Yeah, no waivers for us, and no foreign exchange for us. We were literally buying
Off the street.
Yes, we were buying US dollars when it got to 450, 480,
Ouch.
literally just to meet our US dollar obligation. So that always that was an issue. But it taught us something, and sometimes I say I'd rather be poor than rich, and what I mean by that is sometimes when you are poorer and when you have less cash flow, it gives you a little bit more responsibility. So you tend to build slowly, and you tend to build in a way that's more sustainable. So we've learned some of our lessons, and so we did that. What we did is we approached a few of our clients and we said, look, we will give some discounts and we will reduce this to a Naira rent, but give us some longevity in your payments, and we used that to pay down a lot of our debts, almost all our debts. Yes, the show goes on.
So you're also doing some hedging now.
We're doing some hedging. We're doing some of our personal hedging. Yes.
All right, so looking at the future, what are the long-term plans? Because you're adding value to the economy, you're adding value to Nigeria. What are the long-term plans? You still have a lot of projects ongoing. What is the big picture? Share it with us.
So we call ourselves Landmark Africa. So we want to create destinations in multiple cities. We've traditionally worked in 14 different African countries with our serviced office business. We had offices in 9 of them and in quite a few different cities. So we have experience in East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, and South Africa. We sold our serviced office business 2-3 years ago to the global leader, Regis. And then we decided to focus on our property advisory and property development business. So that's what we would like to replicate. And we'd like to replicate that service office footprint with our property development business. So we're seeking to acquire land holdings in some of these other African countries.
Any other cities in Nigeria that you're looking at?
We are looking at other cities in Nigeria.
The major cities first, if you allow me guess.
Sorry?
The major cities first.
No, we're not like that. We're not like that. I think, look, a country with 180 million people, of which I understand the median age is 19. I mean, one of the things is that we have a young population, so that demographic dividend is there. And what does that mean? That basically means that there are people everywhere. And if you put the right platform and the right products in place, then people access them. And as those people get more disposable income and tend to and basically grow up, then it will work. So we are looking at cities like Owerri, Benin.
Really?
Yes, we're not necessarily...
Does the economy of the city matter the location? Like you look at how well the city is doing economically before you go set up. Is that
not necessarily,
a criteria?
Not necessarily. It is a criteria. I think it's important that the city
you have to be able to do long-term projections.
You have to, yes. But I would say, I'm a big believer in the demographic dividend, yes. And history has taught us that countries, cities, areas that have had young populations that are fast growing have always done well. But it's also a risk.
Especially in entertainment. Entertainment is really for disposable income.
Yes, but people have to live somewhere. They have to eat somewhere. They have to go to school somewhere. They have to go to hospital somewhere. So for being a real estate business and we're providing the envelope for all these activities, then where there are a lot of people, then there's a lot of demand, and that supply-demand dynamics works.
Yes. Some of the work you're doing is around advisory. So if you think about the advisory work you're doing, Nigeria has to get out of being sort of a 3-city country.
Absolutely.
And when you look at tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities, what are some of the opportunities you see there for a business like yours, especially in that tier 3 cities? Do you think we're going to have a significant number of those in the next 20 years? Is it 50 years? When is that going to happen, like other places in the world?
So a lot of it rests, unfortunately, whilst I'm a big believer in private sector taking the leads, a lot of it rests on the governance in these cities.
So we got to go back to the government. We have to go back to the China deals and see what type of infrastructures we're building.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you also have to create a platform that's enabling. I once said, probably 10 years ago, to build a building in, say, Lagos State, you would spend 10 to 15% of the money before you lay a brick in the ground. The government didn't really have a proper enabling system for the private sector. That's changed, or let's say it's changing. It's changing. So the governments are a little bit more enabling, but some governments obviously already are where they want to be, right? When you go to the B cities, the Category 2 and Category 3 cities, those governments are a lot more receptive. You can influence consumer preferences there. You can influence the way the government operates. You can get land at better and cheaper costs. So you can provide better services that don't actually exist because people have concentrated on, Port Harcourt, Lagos, Abuja. I mean, we are in Lagos, and because Lagos you necessarily can't avoid it. And the big risk Lagos has is cities around Lagos getting better. And if they do get better, then Lagos itself would need to up its game to a large extent, so it becomes more convenient and more attractive. Right now, the biggest attraction of Lagos is just that there are a lot of people and commercial activity.
Yes.
All right. So you talked about the fact that you set up in other African countries as well. So tell us the difference between operating in these other African countries and operating in Nigeria.
Huge difference. Huge difference. So the obvious differences of sort of language and economic activity. But I suppose the biggest difference. And I used to say when we used to walk around, drive around or go around other African countries, the biggest difference was just the energy levels. We often don't know what we have in Nigeria. I mean, we have a resilient population, a young population, fast growing.
What about government policies?
So, the government policies are not always great. Yes, they could be a lot better. And some of the other countries have grown, have reached political maturity faster than us. So the government has a more enabling outlook. The government is more accessible. The biggest issue with Nigeria is the government is just simply not accessible. It's very difficult to speak to your leaders. It's very difficult to have one-on-one conversations. It's very difficult to get your leaders to understand the basic problems that you have, and then they take them on.
Well, when you're in Nigeria, you're able to engage much more than in other places, or is it easier?
No, it's easier in other places. That's the problem. It was easier for me to meet the president of Ghana, the president of South Africa, the president of Kenya. I've never met the president of Nigeria. So it's
but you get to travel with them to China. But no. You said something that I don't want us to lose, which is, I mean, I think that it's really important to talk about these things, especially in places in Nigeria where a lot of times we are pessimistic about what's happening. But you said something about the energy and the population and how that really does give us an edge and an advantage. What worries you about us misusing this edge? What worries you?
Well, history has also taught us that having a large population, large young population, growing population that's economically inactive is a huge risk. We saw that in the Arab Spring. And if we misuse and don't create an enabling environment to enable the young people sort of grow, get educated, get into jobs, get employed, and be economically viable, then the risks are that they will turn against you. And sometimes it's a one-way street. It's hard to turn them back around again. So I think it's important for leaders to remain humble, to understand that they're there to serve, and to understand that they're there to create opportunities for the younger citizens. Many of us are already outside our economic cycle. I think the people that really matter, without being too dictatorial, people that really matter are those kids between sort of 15 and 30. Because they're in the fundamental, the good part of their education that needs to be done properly, and their economic activity. After 30, you're influenced by what you've seen in the last 20 years or last 15 years, and before 15 you're probably too young to make a difference. So it's very important to make sure that sector grows up properly, gets educated properly, and does the right things. And when the great Western nations and places like Japan, they grew when they had huge young populations, and they started declining when those populations started aging. Same thing with the tiger economies of Asia. So it's Africa's turn. You know, and Africa has a very young population and growing population. It's our turn now to turn that population into something. If we do what the Arabs did, then the Arab Spring that happened to them
It will happen here.
could quite easily
It's not
happen.
going to.
And you think we're
Thank you.
positioned? All right,
Sorry.
we're wrapping up on this one.
Go ahead and have the last question.
All right, so do you think we're positioned for the benefits of bilateral agreements and all of that with several other countries? Take this China deal, for instance. We've always talked about a balance in trade. We're not just taking from China, we should be giving China something in return. You think that was talked about and considered? As somebody in the private business, you think we have something to offer China?
A lot. We have commodities. So China are here for a reason. They're not here because they love Africa. They're here because they love what we have. So we are in a position. What we've got to make sure is that we don't have that issue that Kenya had in the 70s where they're selling the coffee at 80 cents and it's coming back at $8. So we need to make sure.
Well, we already do that with some of our commodities anyway.
do, absolutely.
So now we have to make sure.
We have to make sure. And I think it's very important to keep an eye on making sure that the bilateral agreements are not just one-sided.
And they're not just signed without implementing.
Without being executed, otherwise they're hallucinations.
So, I mean, entrepreneurs out there, people are watching you, they want to also be a real estate mogul like you. Any advice for people watching today?
The advice our mothers gave us. Excellence, integrity, hard work. There are no shortcuts. I think everything you do needs to be right. The basis needs to be right. You've got to work hard for everything you have. It doesn't come easy unless you're a politician. And excellence. The pursuit of excellence is extremely important.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to having you back, talking about some of the Tier 2 city expansions you'll be doing.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, thank
you very much for having me.
You're watching The Morning Show. We're going on a short break right now. But when we come back, we'll be joined by Mustafa Chike, who will be former Managing Director of Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, to speak to us on the state of Nigeria's economy and about politics and the run-up to 2019.
Yes.
Yes. We'll be right back.